start with start ourselves in the right direction, put ourselves in the right direction. Yes. Just first reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And secondly, the second two lines are just stating this marvelous, altruistic, long-term goal of our being together, that lamas would call it our motivation, our goal, our purpose. Why are we here together? We're stating the reason in the second two lines. So we're thinking that by the amazing virtuous karma we create by listening to these teachings, which puts imprints in our mind, they won't go astray. As a result of this, and then the work we do to nourish those seeds, may we all become a Buddha eventually, which is our natural potential, so we can be a benefit to others. Sangye charang soke chognam la jang cho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye druppa shok sangye charang soke chognam la jang cho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye druppa shok sangye charang soke chognam la jang cho baru dagni kyab suchi Dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penche sangi drupa shok. All right, thanks, Teresa. Okay. Okay, so, away we go. Continuing. So Samsara and Nirvana, these cute words, like I said, they're so popular these days. But the meaning, what we're trying to describe in these last days is the meaning of these words in down-to-earth, real Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy, real, not just pretend, not just fantasy, not just religion, which we think is not real, just Buddhist terms. That's all kind of old, Indian, a couple of thousand years old. So samsara, as I said, is either, you think of it either in the broader way, using this vast view of the Buddhas of the entire universe, all the beings in the universe fit, and there's far more categories of beings than we would posit in the materialist world, because some we can't see with our senses, because the Buddha's view is mind is not physical, and then all minds are sort of inextricably linked to their own set of the four elements. This is the Vajrayana model, so it's interesting. So due to our different karma, which we talked about a little bit, which we'll continue to talk about, sentient beings have literally created our own realities. We create our own realities. Realms of existence, including the human, including the animal, are the product of our past actions. This is essentially Buddha's view. Initially it's quite cosmic. Can't get our head around it. So there's all these realms of existence, all the way from the most intense suffering to all beings, in billions and billions of individual beings on this entire spectrum, from intense suffering to the most intense bliss. This is sort of the bigger picture of being born in samsara, going from life to life to life, driven by these neurotic states of mind, driven by these delusions, these disturbing emotions. So what Buddha's discovered is we can get out of samsara. We can quit this rebirth after rebirth after rebirth, driven by delusions, even some driven by virtue. But still, until we've cut the root completely, we're going to continue to cycle. But he's found methods. All he's telling you is, I have found methods to stop suffering of all kinds and its causes. That's essentially what Buddha is saying, and he presents this in the Four Noble Truths. So that's quite interesting. He's got it all laid out. The methodology is all there, quite coherent, step by step. So we've mainly been talking, though, about being in samsara in terms of being caught up in these delusions themselves, in this actual state of these misconceptions, these delusions, these misconceptions that Buddha has found, as I've just said, that we can get rid of. Because why should we get rid of them? Because they're the cause of suffering. They're the cause of rebirth in all the different realms, and they're the cause of day-to-day suffering. That's really what Buddha is essentially saying. He's found methods to get rid of suffering and its causes. That's it. So clearly we have to know what he means by suffering and its causes. This is his very specific model. It's not the same as a materialist, not the same as a Christian, not the same as a Muslim, not the same as the Australian Aboriginals, not the same as the American Indians, not the same as all the thousands of different cultures we know that have existed since humans began. And all these humans, these clever, marvelous humans, have come up with different methods, haven't they? Different interpretations of the world, of happiness, of suffering. Here we're looking at the Buddhas. And we're looking at the Buddhas specifically through the specific teachings known as the Mahayana teachings of the Buddha, in particular the way they've developed in Tibet since like 700. So there's all these different interpretations around the world. You see, it's all these humans, so many, and it seems to me, if you look at it, so many humans have come up with similar things. We've all come up with different views. They're all viewpoints in the end. And they're all, of course, they're all saying they're right. But our job isn't just to blindly believe them or reject them. Our job is, if we want to know what the meaning of life is, if we want to know what happiness is, if we want to know what suffering is, our job to take it seriously is to listen and then look into these and then attempt to try to verify. What else can you do? There's no shortcut. I mean, we're intellectually lazy when we think of religious or religious philosophy. It's just being intellectually lazy to believe in something. It's quite comfortable. We can sort of pick and choose. You go to the supermarket and I'll believe that, not that. No, I don't like that one. I'll believe that one. Pop it in your little kit bag. It's okay, better than nothing, but kind of lazy. It's up to us. And all the more reason in the Buddhist view up to us, because we are the creators of the universe. This is a cosmic joke. Buddha doesn't assert a creator. He doesn't assert any kind of beings up there, good or bad, who are running things. Not like that. We are the creator. We are the boss of our universe, of our lives, of our happiness, of our suffering. That's the biggest shock of all. And that's pretty unique to the Buddha. That is, in fact, Buddha's unique view. It's pretty intense. I think it's marvelous. I love it. Why? Because I love being the boss. I'm not joking. I love this. When I first heard the teachings in Australia, I was like 31, really looking for a way to see the world, you know. I'd tried the Catholic one, I'd tried the hippie one, I'd tried the communist one, I'd tried the kind of the feminist one, and I got lots from all of that, and it became who I am. Then finally I bumped into these Tibetans. Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe fell into their lap basically on day one. They've been my teachers since. And, you know, I remember I was looking for the meaning of life. I was looking for this. I mean, I didn't say it so crassly, but I was looking for viewpoints. I wanted to know how to understand things. I didn't go the kind of the scientific way. I went the kind of spiritual or philosophical or, you know, what you'd call political ways of seeing the world. And then I stumbled across, you know, I'd always thinking first, like I said, joking always, but it's true. First, it was all the straight people. First, it was all the non-Catholics were the cause of suffering. Then it was all the straight people the cause of suffering. Then it was all the rich people. Then it was all the white people. Then it's all the male people. And who have you got left? I mean, quite literally, I'd exhausted all options. There was no one left. The rich, the white, the male. It comes down to it, doesn't it? This is what I'm thinking. I joke about it, but it's really true. Now, finally, in 2021, finally in, what is it? January 2021, we are finally locating the group that's the cause of all the problem. We've all been white men 1,000 times. Don't take it personally, Gus. Usually white straight men, but never mind. So Gus is not quite in the right group. Not quite. He's a bit weird. But white men, and now it's really fascinating. I don't know if you've noticed, we're finally actually articulating the term white men. But you see, because white men have been the norm and everybody else has been a group that isn't white men. Women aren't white men. Black people aren't white men. You know, gay people aren't proper white men. But now we've got the group called white men, and they're finally seeing that, wow, they're the ones. We've all been, but the point is, when I heard the teachings first, I'd been a radical lesbian separatist feminist. I bet you haven't even heard of them. The most outer edge radical feminist you can find, which suited my mind because I'm radical. But then I came across the lamas and I was in a state of complete shock, you know, but I knew I trusted these people. This is why I knew I belonged there. But the thing that really did strike me of all those teachings, struck me from Lama Zopa about all this Lam Rim teachings, was the word karma. When I heard what it meant, it just resonated so deeply. And then I began to realize sexism is true, racism is true, poverty is true, blah, blah. But we are kind of all going from life to life, creating all this, all the happiness and all the suffering. And that was pretty powerful for me. And I realized even then hearing it, I knew there's no point in shouting and yelling and blaming. You know, you can get up there and be politically active, no problem. But I caused it. I'm the cause. I'm experiencing the fruit of my past actions. That for me is the most sublime, amazing view, you know. And of course, it's, as we've been talking, it's the fundamental one. It's the basis of all of Buddha's view, all of Buddha's psychology, all of Buddha's metaphysics, all of Buddha's philosophy, all of Buddha's epistemology, the lot. So if we're interested in Buddhism, we at least have the intelligence to posit the possibility, to go against our resistance to it, because we can't stand the thought of it, you know. So it's interesting. Then we're going to find out one day or other, we're going to find out if it's right or wrong, because it's either right or it's wrong. There's no two options, you know. Anyway, we've been looking at all this. So, you know, how do you get from samsara to nirvana? Samsara is when you're caught up in suffering, and nirvana is when you quit suffering. That's as simple as that. And they're both states of mind. Both names, if you're speaking loosely, given to your mindset, to the way you see the world, because that finally is the point for the Buddha. That's the total point. So nirvana, if you're in nirvana, okay, you're the beginnings of nirvana. We'll talk about this today. The beginnings of when you really do the first radical climbing out of samsara into your nirvana is from the first moment You've had a non-conceptual, direct insight into the fact that there never has been, isn't, and never could be an independent I. So, of course, these words are so abstract, like excuse me, independent I, who cares, you know? We've never heard of that. But this is the final mistake. We've been talking right now. Okay, go backwards. Given Buddha's view, look at the word Buddha. Buddha implies the eradication of all neurosis from the mind. Very simple, quite insane. You say that to a therapist in the West and they'll think you're mentally ill. They'll give you a pill to calm you down, because we take it as a given that a normal person has some fear, some depression, some anxiety, some attachment, some love and compassion, hopefully more of the good, but no way is there any view in modern psychology, in neuroscience, that you can rid the mind utterly of all the neuroses. Not a possibility. That's what freedom from suffering means, and its causes. This is the Buddha's point. It's what he's found to be true. It's kind of insane if you think about it. Putting it in down-to-earth words, not holy Tibetan, Indian words that make us think it's in the sky, you know. So it's good to be blunt sometimes. This is what he's found to be true. Not only can you rid the mind of all the rubbish, you can grow the goodness, which is what's left, which is what our true nature is, which is in the nature of bliss, which is the nature of wisdom, which is in the nature of virtue. This is real. This is who we are, both conventionally and ultimately for the Buddha. That's inferred by the second syllable, da. So if you hear the end result of this long course went on, this course to Buddhahood, Buddha is the result, then, and you hear that you can get rid of the rubbish and grow the goodness, it implies the method. It's so simple, it implies the methodology. You better learn your mind, baby. Now that's in high school. So what are you going to do in junior school first to get yourself ready? Because our minds are not ready for that, because we're too berserk. So we've got to calm the servants of the mind down in junior school, abide by the laws of karma. The explicit teaching there is good ethics, you know. But again, reminding us what is the basis for these good ethics. Why is Buddha saying don't kill? Why does Jesus say don't kill? Think of, this is a radical difference. Jesus says it because it's God's will. God is the boss. God runs the show. I have no problem with that. If you live your life according to God and you have faith in the Creator, you'll be a happy human being, I swear. You'll lead a good ethical life and you'll be joyful because you know someone's got a plan. At least someone's got a plan. And you're content to have faith in him. I think that's an incredible philosophy. It's just not Buddha's, that's all. So Buddha says don't kill. Excuse me, mate, why not? Because, sweetie pie, Robina, petal, everything you do, say, and think will sow seeds in your mind and will produce the future person you become. So you want to get killed, lied to, harmed, abused, raped, murdered, born in a lower realm? No, Buddha. Well, here's my advice, honey. It's a bit like you go to the Whole Food stores and you get the homeopathic section. They're very practical, the homeopaths. They've got your list of your illnesses from A to Z. You look up your list of illness, arthritis. You go zoop. Oh, there it is, arnica. There's your medicine. Thank you. Buddha's like that. You don't want this suffering? Take this medicine. No, you don't take a medicine. You stop doing something. You don't want to be killed? Well, don't kill. You don't want to be lied to? Don't lie. It's really almost, it's so simple as a methodology, but because it's so simple, we think it's kind of like childish, kind of hilarious, So Buddha isn't a creator. He has, from his own experience, found this to be true and is giving you the results of his own experience and is giving you his methodology, the methodology that he tried. So if you're a Buddhist, that's what you're doing. You're taking all this as your hypothesis, and eventually one day you'll prove it to be true. Or, as the Dalai Lama says, you'll prove it not to be true, in which case you'll say, thank you, Buddha, goodbye. You enjoyed your company. That's the approach. Okay. We kind of discussed it. So karma, so you know how we talk about the lamb rim and it's gotten these different stages of practice. Junior school, high school, university, as I like to call it. Properly speaking, as Lama Zopa respecting the lineage would say, the first scope of practice, as Tsongkhapa puts it, is the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Then you've got the middle capability and you have the great capability. That's the two wings of the bird. The first two scopes, junior school and high school. Wisdom wing, that's the Hinayana practice. If you're in Burma and Thailand, that's the work you do. It's the same here. But in this one, the Mahayana, you don't graduate at high school, you go to university. You do the Mahayana component. So each step of the way in these stages of practice, you are lessening, you are preparing yourself to do the final job of actually experiencing nirvana, like I said. But you've got to prepare yourself one step at a time. You can't just go overnight. We know that everything's like that. You can't just suddenly start playing Bach. You can't suddenly start doing physics. You can't suddenly start realizing emptiness. You've got to you prepare yourself. First, your body, speech, control them. Then you control your mind in high school. Then you finally get to the Mahayana. You do compassion. And the final stages of the Mahayana, you then do the one of cutting the root delusion. That's the source of all the problems in the first place. So what's interesting here, just out of interest, the final stages of the Mahayana path, as we know, is called the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva. The first stages of the Mahayana path is when you accomplish this amazing, outrageous bodhicitta, this paradigm shift in the mind, where from then on, only others are in your mind, only others are important. You've trained yourself to the point. Even that is insane in our culture. That sounds like mental illness, to think that you don't even think of yourself anymore. That's demented for us. We can't get our heads around that. This is bodhicitta, an outrageous state of mind. So it's then in the Mahayana, when you go to the next stage, which is when you bop along from life to life to life, perfecting these 6 perfections. The first 4 are essentially you're perfecting the compassion wing. You're perfecting all the marvelous good qualities in you by continuing to smash all the remnants of delusions, especially so, perfecting generosity, perfecting morality, perfecting patience, perfecting enthusiastic perseverance. You do that in day-to-day, bopping around in your life in relation to sentient beings. And then in your meditation, you perfect the last 2. Concentration, shamatha, and then insight into emptiness. That's the final job. That's when you cut the root. Now, concentration and emptiness are not in their nature Mahayana teachings. They are Hinayana teachings. They belong to high school. So if you're on the Hinayana path and your goal is to become a Hinayana Arhat, a person who's a person who's destroyed the enemy, an enemy destroyer. You've destroyed the root delusion by realizing emptiness. So if you do it in high school, it's a character of it is a high school teaching. Concentration, samadhi, single point of concentration, shamatha, is not even a Buddhist teaching. It's from these amazing Hindus before. Buddha happily took it and they happily shared it, no problem. It's actually these Hindus before, the ones who came up with this genius skill that enables you to access these subtle levels of your mind, the microscope of your mind, because it's only when you've got the microscope of your mind can you see the subtle phenomenon called emptiness. So that's in the high school section. But if you're on the Mahayana path, you don't learn about those. The main thing you get from high school and junior school is renunciation of suffering. You're giving up attachment. Then you go to the Bodhisattva path. Then you get bodhicitta. And now because you have this amazing, outrageous, unbelievable, powerful, unbearable compassion, as Lama Zopa calls it, you're not in danger of getting caught up in the bliss now of your own blissful mind, which is the danger. If you're on the Hinayana path and you get the bliss, it's so divine, it's so incredible, it's so beyond belief that you can forget about sentient beings. So it's taught in the Lam Rim at the end, once you've got bodhicitta. Then there's no danger you can ever lose your wish to benefit sentient beings. You're no longer captivated by the bliss. This is very interesting. So, in the 4 Noble Truths, we know from the first Noble Truth there are 3 levels of suffering. Grossest one, subtler one, the most subtle. So you see, this is where, I don't even know how to articulate the 8, what is it, the 8-fold path? I don't even know the points. That's a very classical way of presenting the 4th truth, which is the solution, the method. But the Lam Rim is another way of presenting it, which is the one I'm more familiar with. The Lam Rim is exactly the presentation of the methodology to achieve liberation from suffering and its causes, which is the 4th truth. So essentially, the first kind of suffering is called the suffering of suffering, the one we all accept. Forget about the realms of existence, but that's also implied. But just because we understand in this life suffering. The second kind of suffering we tried to describe yesterday, and when we articulate it, we can all see it, the suffering of change, what we call happiness. Because in this culture that we live in this world we live in this planet, in this universe, in this samsara that we live in, which is driven and created by attachment, then happiness obviously is when attachment gets what it wants. The first kind of suffering is when happiness, when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So we spend our lives trying to avoid the ugly things and trying to get the nice things. That's all we know. And all Buddha's doing is says, I've got a more subtle presentation of things. I found at a subtler level that in fact the happiness that you're getting now is still happiness. Yep, but it's not stable. It doesn't last. It turns into suffering. And actually, in comparison with what I've found is the happiness we can all accomplish, it's really, really gross. So that's the eye-opener. That's the one we have to consider the possibility of. And what experiences that happiness? Not some special part of you called a soul. Buddha doesn't posit such a thing. Your mind, baby. But a subtle level of your mind that we don't even posit in our samsaric philosophical view. So the first kind of suffering is when the bad things happen. The second kind of suffering is when the good things happen, but they don't last and they turn into the bad things again. So it's kind of like catch-22. It's really depressing. The third kind of suffering is too abstract for our mind initially. It's called all pervasive suffering or conditioned suffering. And that's kind of like being born in the first place. So the first kind of suffering, speaking from the perspective of attachment, if you like, even attachment, not even ego grasping, sort of. The first kind of suffering is you're born in a world, you're born in a world made of junk with the mind of a junkie and the body that's created by that mind of a junkie, and you can't get what you want. So you're going crazy. You get the bad things. You go mad. You can't get happiness. So the distress, what suffering is the terrible lack of happiness. That's what really suffering is getting what attachment doesn't want. Getting punched and lied to and stolen from and terrible suffering and pain is getting what attachment doesn't want. So it's unbearable. So that's the suffering of suffering. Then the second kind of suffering, which we think is happiness, is when attachment does get what it wants, which is, but as we discussed yesterday, getting the object of attachment does trigger happiness, no argument. But all Buddha's saying is the quality of that happiness is very short, it's really limited, and it's really gross. And the more we understand it, the more we'll see it's awful. It's not happiness at all. It's hard to see that. And it's easy to see it as moralistic. As Lama Zopa says, when we hear the Buddha says we've got to give up attachment, oh, I've got to give up my heart, I've got to give up my happiness, because we haven't gone into it enough to really understand what he means. We take it too grossly, too superficial. So we can't bear it. So then that's being born as a junkie with a mind of a junkie, attachment, in a body made by junkie, but made by attachment, which is the five senses. And that's where you just have to get the nice things, and you just don't realize it'll turn into the unnice things again, because you eat too much cake. We discussed the very thing that you thought was the cause of happiness has turned into the source of being fat, of having acid reflux and wanting to vomit. This is not even a joke, but we can't hear it properly. We don't believe it. Attachment tomorrow rushes off and sees the cake and gets all excited again. So in other words, tomorrow after the cake the day before has made you vomit, you don't remember that. You just remember the delicious bit. So we rush off again. Maybe it'll work this time, we say. And Buddha says we've been bashing our heads against brick walls for quite a few lifetimes. Keep hoping that it will make me happy this time. That's essentially what attachment is. It's the mind of an idiot, but we're junkies. It's very painful. And why, like I said yesterday, is because we can't see any other option. If we could see the option, we'd be blissed out to get rid of attachment. But we can't see the option. It's hard to see the option. And that's why Lama Yeshe was so amazing. He would try and tell us about the possibility of our own blissful mind. And it gets you excited. At least he's telling us there's the possibility. This is what you'd be like, even getting shamatha, which we've had countless lives before, Buddha says. But not enough. We haven't used it to realize emptiness. So the third kind of suffering is being born in the first place as a result of being a junkie. Your own karmic evolution. You've created a body of the five senses, which is created by your attachment. You've got a body of a junkie with the mind of a junkie in a world made of junk. So this is what I'm saying before, there is no option. We can see no option. That's what I'm getting about in the middle scope. There's no option other than getting the object of the senses to get happy. We can't see any option. And that's the worst suffering, all pervasive suffering. You're born in a world made of heroin. and you have a mind of a heroin addict and a body that's made by that from past lives. So you don't have a choice but to continue to ingest junk, always hoping that possibly that happiness is better than nothing. It's better than nothing, you know. The Buddha says we're locked, we're imprisoned in this. So it's a question of using our minds, you know, to be more intelligent, to listen carefully, to look deeper. It's very painful. So that's all pervasive suffering. So what are the solutions? Fourth Noble Truth, what are the solutions? In terms of the Lam Rim, junior school, back off and don't kill and don't steal and don't rape and don't jump on the wrong partner and don't lie and don't steal, blah, blah. That's a solution to stopping the suffering of suffering. It's unbelievably simple. It's in fact so simple. With such confidence, Buddha has listed his medicine to stop the suffering of suffering. Already, if you just practice junior school, you will continue to get a decent human body, and you'll be fine. You'll stay stable, you know. But you can do more. So you go to high school, now you become your own therapist. Now you get to the root of the problem, the mind. But don't worry about emptiness yet. You just got to unpack and unravel the mind to start to distinguish between the delusions and the virtues. This is the key of the job of being a Buddhist. This is the job of being a Buddhist. To develop the skill, the ability, the intelligence, the clarity to be able, minute by minute, to distinguish between the neurotic, painful, I-based, deluded, ridiculous states of mind, in particular attachment, and between those and the virtues, the love, the kindness, the wisdom. There's this big soup of emotion right now. Not only are all the peas and the carrots all mixed up together, they're pureed. So it's a hard job. Attachment comes along with love. Compassion comes along with anger. We actually even conflate them. This is really the trickiest job, and this is the miracle of the job, to become your own therapist. Lama's not joking, but it demands subdued body and speech. If you vomit out everything you feel, you've got no space to see what drives that speech. It's your mind. If you want to punch and kick every person you like, or jump on every boy you like, or eat every piece of cake you like, you don't have time to see the mind that drives it. That's why the first level of practice is a fundamental basis of all practice. Learning to control your crazy speech and body. Stop, at least simply stop harming others. And then you get the message. Buddha doesn't say don't eat too much cake. Cake doesn't mind, okay? It's not sentient. All those 7 are related to sentient beings. They're things you do to harm others, the heaviest of negative actions. Therefore, they bring the heaviest result to you. So Buddha defines a negative action. Catholics define a negative action as doing what God said not to do. This is crucial to understand, like I mentioned before. That's the basis of why you must not kill, because God said. Buddha's is nothing to do with the fact that he says it. He's just a messenger. Your doctor doesn't tell you to not smoke because she says so. And if you smoke, I'll punish you. You would laugh at that. But that's how we think of religion. That's okay. If you're a Christian or a Muslim, fine. It's not Buddha's deal. He says don't kill because you've been a petal sweetheart. That'll imprint in your mind those tendencies, so you'll keep getting that kind of tendency and have that experience. You don't want that. So in other words, the Buddhist one is so integrated. It's natural law. It's natural law. It's natural law. No one made it up. This is what's so intense about it. So in junior school, you stop the grossest kind of suffering of suffering. High school, you stop the suffering of change because you give up attachment. Well, not totally until you realize emptiness, but basically you subdue it. So you become this renounced person. Renounced what? Not happiness. No, you renounce suffering and its causes, and you're radiant, you're blissful, you're joyful, you're stable, you're disciplined, you're grown up, you're intelligent, you're self-respectful. That's the consequence of practicing junior school and high school. So you've given up the second kind of suffering, the suffering of change. Now, you got to get to the root of it and quit all suffering, all rebirths, all nonsense. So you got to go to the Mahayana path, and then you do the 6 perfections, and then you get the concentration, which is the ability to get to a subtle level of mind so you can finally unpack, unravel, see clearly how there isn't, has never been, and can't be that fantasy I that the ego grasping, that the ignorance, the root delusion believes in. You cut that one. So from the first second of your non-conceptual insight into that truth, emptiness of intrinsic existence, you begin your climb out of samsara into nirvana. You've got lots of work to do yet to get nirvana still, But you cannot fall back after that. That's the one we haven't done until now. We've had single point of concentration countless times. We've been world turning kings. We've been in the God realms. We've had joy that you can't even imagine. We've even had bodhicitta. We've lost it because we haven't realized emptiness. So it's one step at a time. Junior school, then high, then university. And then if you're on the Mahayana path, you want to speed it all up, you go hop into Vajrayana and you go to postgraduate and you become enlightened really quick. That's the Buddha's path. That's the part of get out of samsara into nirvana. But then you add the bodhicitta to it and you've got the Buddhahood. That's what we've been talking about. So yesterday we looked at attachment and how it's a suffering, it causes the suffering of change. We also looked at karma a bit more and purification and vows. So the very fundamental starting point, as I said before, is at least, as Lama Zopa says, start immediately stopping killing, stopping stealing, stop harming others, basically. They're not the only negative actions. Every action that's driven by a delusion is called a negative action, but these are the most intense because they harm others. And these are the ones that bring the result of the called experiences similar to the cause, which is what others do to us. Because we've done that to them. So that's the basic one. But there are tools to use that give enormous power to that level of practice. One is doing it in the context of living in vows of not harming others, and the other is to purify. These put atomic bombs under the karmic imprints of negativity, and they also enable us to create incredible virtue at the same time as purify the mind. In fact, we can't get ahead of the game, according to the Buddhist teachings, if we understand them properly, by just being a nice person. Just being good is not enough, Lama Zopa says. And that's the crucial logical reason, as we discussed when we broke down a negative action, or a positive action too. Yeah, we broke down an action. A complete action needs 4 things in place when you do it. For it to qualify as a complete action, which drops a seed into your main bank vault, which at the time of death will then produce one of those seeds, which will produce a type of rebirth. You get negative seed, if it's triggered, will be a complete action of killing, a complete action of one of those negative actions, especially killing. That'll produce you to get a life, as you run to a lion mummy's womb, you'll run to the ant egg. That's the product of the complete action of negativity. A complete action of positivity, 4 things in place, that would produce something like a human body. At least, it's not the best of all, but it's the best of a bad lot. So the 4 things in place, like we talked yesterday, it has to be the object in terms of killing or non-killing. There's got to be a little living being there, a mouse. Second, your mind involved in it, and 2 main things. There's other parts, but this is enough for now. Intention and then motivation. But they are so totally come together for us, we think they're the same thing. Intention is the bare bones thought, I will not kill that mouse. Then the part that gives it its character and turns it into a negative or positive action is the motivation. It colors the action. It defines the action as negative or positive. Not the doing of the action. That's not even it. It's what motivates it. That's the key to understanding. And that, in fact, it tells us then how to practice, The third one is you do the action. 4th, dead mouse or living mouse, whichever it is. There's more to it than that, but that's essentially it. Any action that has those 4 in place, that's a complete action, and it drops a seed into your negative complete action bank vault or your positive one. And that's one of those seeds is what brings your future rebirth. Then the other 3 results play out in this life. The tendency to keep doing it, good or bad, the experience of having happened to you, and even the way the physical world impacts upon you, the environmental result. So this is so now that's the basic, that's what we need by the time we die is bucket loads of delicious, rich, intentional, virtuous seeds of non-killing, just to get another human body. But like I said, Lama Zopa says, being good is not enough. So one of the logical reasons why vows are so potent is because every second you keep a vow, 24 hours a day, even when you're not thinking about it, even when there's no intention, even when at that moment there's no motivation, doesn't matter. The vows are so powerful. They cause you every second to be creating virtue and every second to be purifying your mind. Now, if that's true, this is the easiest, peasiest way ever to create merit. It's like getting 100,000% return on your investment. I'm not kidding. That super appeals to me. This is why I am a nun. I promise you. Because I enjoy the idea of vows. It makes great sense to me. It's not only nuns who have vows. You know, lay people have vows too. So, okay. Now, this is an interesting point. Now, remember that fisherman yesterday I talked about? When we looked at how feeling and attachment and karma all mixed together at the second he first met fishing, which caused him to, it made a delicious feeling arise because he's got past karmic connection with fishing. He's very familiar with it. It looks familiar to him even. He doesn't think that. And it instantly sees, it makes contact, it brings up a delicious feeling, happy feeling. We all want happiness. So logically, he will deduce that fishing causes it. Of course, sounds like it. But at the same time, that second later, attachment kicks in and paints a magnificent picture of fishing. I remember reading about one Australian author years ago. He's dead now. He was an historian and he wrote a lot of books. And he's also, he was the arts writer for Time magazine for like 40 years, Australian fellow. God, now I can't remember his name. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I remember reading about it when he was a fisherman, and the way he wrote, because he was a very good writer, he wrote in a poetic way about this first time he went trout fishing. He said it was a cosmic experience. Now, if you analyze that, all he was saying is he had such strong habit from the past from killing fish, such strong habit that the millisecond he went trout fishing, it triggered an extremely joyful experience. Extremely joyful experience, what he meant by a cosmic experience. And millisecond at the same time, attachment kicked in and made it look incredibly divine. This is how we live our lives in samsara. You might not think that eating cake brings a cosmic experience, you know, but that's what we're hoping for. Every time we touch an attachment object. So the strength of your past habit with it is the depth of the pleasure or displeasure that arises. This is what sucks us in. And then attachment takes over, and then we believe this story without the millisecond of doubt. So this is the tragedy. How come that boy got born with the tendency to kill in the first place? Because he'd done it before. So he'd been in the lower realms in the past, which is the complete result of having killed. And eventually that ran out. It purified, it finished. He exhausted that karma. The lower realms finished, which was the suffering, the main result of killing. That eventually was exhausted. And then like a miracle, the life before that, before he turned into this boy born to a mummy in Sacramento, that karma finished, and like a miracle, a virtuous karma of non-killing was triggered, and then he got a human body. But he hadn't purified all aspects of the killing. This is the tragedy. Now, there was another boy. I always quote these two stories. Two little boys. One little boy was that one, and the other little boy, his mother, who's a Buddhist, told me, Deichen, she told me that when she was taking, he was like 3, 4, and she was taking the lice out of his head, sentient beings. She was gently taking them out, and he was in tears. Mommy, mommy, don't hurt them. It's their home. Leave them alone. He did everything he could, crying with compassion for these little sentient beings in his own little head. Now, she hadn't had time to teach him this. The fisherman's mummy hadn't had time to teach her boy fishing. They came born with these tendencies. So that boy is like 40 plus something now. He has never killed a living being. So not only did he have immediate compassion for a sentient being in his own head, he's never had the thought to kill. So the difference between those two boys is the boy who had compassion, the boy who did fishing, he had finished that particular karma, but he hadn't purified all aspects. The other boy had purified all aspects of killing, got a human birth, had no tendency to kill, hasn't yet died, and is healthy and fat. They're the 4 results of non-killing. So the fisherman boy, he was healthy. He had lovely experiences similar to the cause. He had good environmental karma, but he had a tendency to kill, which is the worst. Because what happened is he goes straight back to the lower realms, you know. So that's why you have to have vows and the purification practice. That's the difference. So just being a nice person is not enough. You're a nice person now because you've programmed your mind in the past by being nice. So you think, oh, I'm a nice person. I don't want to lie. I don't want to kill. Oh, I don't want to steal. I'm not a pedophile. Look at all those monsters. I'm not like that. You're right. You aren't. But you're running out your goodness. You're like that now because you've lived in vows and purified in the past, but you don't know that, and you just rest on your laurels and you think you're a nice person, and then when you die, because you never thought about it, your virtuous karma runs out. You've got to keep topping it up by living in vows and by purification. It tops up the virtue and makes your mind super powerful, and it cuts the habits. And that's the power of the four opponent powers. We'll discuss that now. There are 4 of these steps when you do the purification. You regret from the depths of your heart the dumbest, stupidest things you've done in the past with your body and speech to harm others. And you have such compassion for yourself because you were driven by idiocy. You're driven by confusion. You're driven by delusions. You're driven by believing in attachment and believing in these lies in our mind. You're just foolish. Have compassion for yourself. You didn't know any better. That's what regret means. I'm an idiot. I hurt my. And look at all these seeds I've planted. This is for yourself first, not compassion for others yet. I don't want the future suffering. What a fool. I don't know what this. I didn't know sugar hurt me. I didn't know I was going to get diabetes. I didn't know when I smoked 80 Marlboros a day, plus speed, plus marijuana, that I might ruin my lungs. Luckily, I didn't. I had no idea. Not always 80, mostly 40. When I was really high on speed, I'd smoke 80 a day, in between the marijuana. The advantage for me of being an extreme person is I got to 80 fags a day, 80 Marlboros. I knew I couldn't I couldn't take any more. So I realized it was absurd. No happiness was coming. So I had to give it up. I knew that speed. I've got up to like 80 milligrams a day of speed. My sister and I both decided to take, I don't know what they call it these days. It's called much heavier, ice and all those things. Whatever speed was, amphetamines or something. But the truck drivers took to stay awake. You lose weight quickly. In 1969, when I was living in London, and Miles Davis, whom I was completely in love with, jazz musician, he was coming to London. I hadn't seen Miles Davis before, so I wanted to get thin for Miles. So I went on speed, and I took up to 80 milligrams a day. My sister stayed at 7; she was more reasonable, and I lost masses of weight, of course. So I was so happy, and I was thin. And I went to all Miles Davis's concerts. I was completely in love with Miles Davis, so I got thin for Miles Davis. Anyway, it's just a little stupid story. That was when I was smoking 80 Marlboros a day. Anyway, I gave it up. Luckily, I'm not dead, you know. So what I'm getting at, I forget what I'm getting at, my stupid story. Oh, I lost the plot completely. Purification, okay. So I didn't know then, did I, using the analogy, that I could ruin my lungs by smoking all those cigarettes. I was foolish. So with the actions we've done in the past, countless past lives, when you were a whale, one mouthful of one breakfast of that one whale's life, 40 years of it, 40 million little sentient beings went in your mouth. That's good killing. We're not nearly as good as that as humans. So all these countless lives, out of ignorance and fear and dramas and suffering and delusions, we have harmed sentient beings out of our own distress, our own fears, our own attachment, our own anger, our own hurt. That's why sentient beings harm each other, out of terrible, terrible, terrible ignorance and fear. So we regret this from the depths of our hearts. We didn't know we were harming ourselves. That's the first step. So what does regret purify specifically? This is so powerful. This is so powerful. What that purifies specifically, all of them all together purify everything. But what this regret specifically purifies is the kind of karma called experiences similar to the cause, which is what happens to you at the hands of others. So let's say you're purifying, let's say you regret lying. What that purifies is you being lied to, you not being believed. Now, let's say at work, someone's not believing you. You've been accused of something you didn't do, and no one believes you. You know how nightmarish that is. You can't believe these people are being so mean. You can't believe these people are believing this nonsense, you know, believing in lies. People believe you lied and you didn't lie. So regretting, not just saying, oh, I regret lying. Karma is very specific and very personal. So if you're having that pain at work, instead of going crazy, trying to get the lawyers, trying to force them to believe you, what you do instead is you think, Whatever lies I told in the past to these particular people who don't believe my words, I regret that. Could have been 47 lifetimes ago. I regret that from the depths of my heart, because I know I don't like this suffering. Look at it right in my face now. Don't be surprised if you do that every day, that it starts to shift, because you're changing the karma, because you're purifying the cause, your past lying. So purification is really specific, not some generalized, guilty, religious feeling, you know. It's very specific. Just like medicine is very specific. You don't just take any old medicine for any old illness. You get the exact, you go up to the homeopathic, you see it's arthritis and you see arnica, you buy your arnica. It's specific. So regret is a specific one of regretting the foolish things you've done in the past, one of the causes of which, the results of which is you getting that back. If you're regretting, let's say, you know, you're run over by ants in your house. No matter what you do, the ants keep coming. Well, you know, poor old ants, they think it's their house. You know, they probably think you're invading their house because we put the money up and pay the mortgage. We think it's our house. So what you look at the action, this is experience similar to the cause. You look at the action. What is happening? They're invading your house. They're eating your food. They're making your house dirty. They're coming in uninvited. Think like that. Well, that's the actions you've done in the past to these ants. So what do? You regret whatever you did to these ants 59,000 lives ago, whatever, which are actions that are bringing that experience similar to those causes. You be specific. So as well as being clean and trying to move them out and be gentle to the ants and give them breakfast somewhere else instead of slaughtering them all, don't be surprised they'll stop coming, because you purified the root cause, your past action. It's so specific. But even if we're all good Buddhists, we don't do so specific. You know, my friends in prison who've killed, let's say, or tortured or whatever they've done, naturally we think that's the main cause of why they're in prison. No, it is not. That's just the cooperative cause. Not everybody. I mean, there are plenty of psychos in prison, but there are 10 times more psychos not in prison who didn't get caught. So the main cause, so you look at the experience of being in prison. What is it? You're completely lost your freedom. You cannot move. You cannot escape. Often they're dirty. The noise is shocking. You're treated badly. There's about a half a dozen different actions there. So you look at each of those. The cause of that type of experience isn't killing. Killing brings the result of getting killed. They're not getting killed. Killing now is the cooperative cause, this catalyst, that's all, that triggers that specific suffering of being imprisoned and your freedom gone and not being treated with respect. So if you're regretting, if you want to get out of prison, regret the things you must have done of taking away people's freedom, of abusing others, of arrogance and treating people low. Because certainly the prisons on this planet are even lower than homeless people, I think, because people are scared of them. So karma is very specific. Killing isn't the main cause of being in prison. It's a cooperative cause, that's all. The cause is something similar to that experience. You've done that to sentient beings. You know, especially the prisoners like my friend, always I quote the story of this one woman, Sunny, who's now out of prison since the 70s. She was accused with a husband of killing 2 policemen. They were totally innocent, these hippies, for God's sake. Completely, totally innocent. But nobody believed them. Nobody. So they were in prison. Even the husband was executed, and she was in prison with him, and she went to the execution and his head burst into flames. Can you imagine the nightmare, you know? So eventually she got out. And now she works in Ireland with her husband, who was Irish, who was also accused of murder, who also was innocent and also got out. And now they're helping other people who've been exonerated, you know, helping people get over the pain of all this. So you analyze the causes of that. She's not a Buddhist. That's not what she thinks. I'm just giving you the example. Clearly, she had heavy-duty karma of lying, because nobody, from the judge, the police, the jury, everybody, nobody believed them. With absolute certainty, everything pointed to their guilt. I mean, can you imagine that level of suffering? You absolutely go mad, you know. She was like a miracle. She was amazing. She wasn't a Buddhist. She was this nice little Jewish hippie, you know. She did yoga and things, but she decided, this is an extra point now, she decided, when she was sitting there in isolation for year after year with just a Bible to read, she decided, she said, at some point I realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided I had a choice, you know. I decided, she said, I am not a prisoner. I am a monk. I am not in a prison. I am in a cave. Well, that's realization of emptiness for a start. I mean, nothing has an intrinsic nature, and the powerful ability to be able to change her mind, and also having the miracle of patience. She wasn't an angry person. She didn't go out of her brain with rage and impotence and sadness. That's unbelievable. So eventually she got out of prison like a miracle. But so this is in daily life. You look at your experience, how people see you, how people treat you. If people always adore you, that's the fruit of your incredible kindness in the past. Never take it for granted. You might be a creep right now. You might be lying and stealing. Look at Mr. Trump and his 75 million fans. I'm not being rude. 80 million people, whatever the numbers are, Some people hate him and see him as a monster. Some people think he's a saint. This really shows the karma of Mr. Trump as much as anything. This is how you use karma in daily life. Not some vague notion, oh, it's all karma. Oh, it's all karma. It's like looking at a garden. Oh, it's all botany. How does it work, Robina? I don't know. What good is that? So the first of the 4 opponent powers, regretting the things you've done because you do not want the suffering. It's totally compassion for yourself. And we've got to cultivate that because we do not have that one. What it purifies specifically is the kind of karma called experiences similar to the cause. Next one, excuse me, I have to blow my nose. I talk too much. And Santa Fe is very dry. It's about 3,000 meters up, I think, or more than that. No, not 3,000. Not meters, feet. Hang on a sec. Okay, so the second one, you can do these in different order. They're done in different order, but this is the order I like. So first you regret, you acknowledge you ate that poison. What an idiot. I can't believe it. I don't want the future suffering. So whom can I turn to? The second one is reliance. So the first part is refuge. The second part of the second step is called compassion. So you rely upon the Buddha. You're so happy to have a doctor. The second part is compassion, when you think of those you've harmed. So this, they say, this step, reliance, purifies environmental karma. I don't quite understand that one. But they have a saying, like those sentient beings, they're the ones you harmed. Well, developing compassion for those very sentient beings is like you're relying upon sentient beings. To get compassion, you've got to know about sentient beings. If you can't have compassion, if you meet anybody, you never meet any suffering sentient being. And if you're really brave, as Geshe Sopa says, the Bodhisattvas need their enemies, best ones. So this karma purifies environmental, having compassion. And they say that the ground that you fall down on is the very ground you rely upon to stand up. So that the harming you've done to sentient beings, those very sentient beings are those whom you rely upon to transform your mind, something like that. The third one, the remedy, which is when you, in this case of Vajrasattva practice, you visualize the Buddha, you say the mantra. This for all the lamas is said to be the most potent. Often this is called the antidote, the direct antidote. That purifies the lower realms, the main result. The fourth one, it's sort of obvious, when you determine to change, resolve. I will not lie again. I will not steal again. Every day you do that, you dig this groove deeper and deeper in your mind until, like that little boy, next life wakes up with unbelievable compassion for the creatures in his own head, and it never occurs to him for the rest of his life to ever kill a living being, because he vowed he would never kill again. It is so logical what that one changes. This is the main one, Pabonka says. That's why, look at all the humans on this planet who continue to kill. They've got the human body. They won the lottery. But it's like they've won the lottery. They've got $1 billion and they're using their dollars as toilet paper, because they're using their human life to continue to kill. And where do you end up? Straight back in the lower realms, and then continuing to kill again. And this nightmare never ends until you purify it. So deciding, not just not killing, that's the point, not just merely not killing. And if you've got such, this is the point, if you've got such good karma, like hear me in Santa Fe, I've met a few ants. I have not yet met a rat, a cockroach, a mosquito, not one. I have not met one being who is trying to harm me. That's due to my virtuous karma. And many of us are like that. If you live in India, it's like living in Jurassic Park. You are bombarded daily by all these creatures. I remember being in India in the rainy season, and you go to Bodh Gaya in the rainy season, as the sun goes down, the ground is a carpet of living beings. It's like you've got to think every second to not kill, otherwise you slaughter thousands of beings. That's due to our karma, whether we meet beings who are trying to harm us. So we think, oh, aren't I lucky? I've got no cockroaches. Oh, aren't I lucky? I've got no mice. You're not lucky, honey. You created the cause by being kind in the past that you don't have to kill. But if you just rest on your laurels, you are not creating any more virtuous karma. The karma will run out. So you've got to keep topping up the karma by every day living in vows. I will never kill. You don't have to meet a being to say you won't kill. It's in your mind 24 hours a day, that vow. And by purifying, not just now, but the billions of karmic seeds are in our minds since the beginning of this time. You've got to put atomic bombs under them. So you'll wake up next life with another human body, if not in nirvana, whichever one you get. And you won't have a thought to kill. And you won't meet beings that you'll be forced to kill. And you won't be attacked by others. That's the benefit of living in vows and doing the 4 opponent powers, So I think I need to ask you ask me some questions now, please, about all that. It's noon for you in New York. Ask me some questions now. Any questions there, Teresa?
Yes, there is a question here. It says, could you talk more about the karma of stealing? You mentioned before one might not get a job. Could you elaborate on that? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say, actually. I'm happy to talk about it, yeah. I don't know if there's much more to say, except if you hear the simple, like, in other words, you're asking me, what is it? Say more about arnica and how it cures arthritis. I don't know the mechanics of it, but I can trust that logic. So here, the logic is fairly evident. If we can see in the world, isn't it? Some people, even if they're mega rich, they never make ends meet. One of the consequences of stealing is you never make ends meet. You might have money, but you can't pay your mortgage on time, so you lose everything. Some people work for 80 hours a week and still not can make ends meet. This is due to stealing as well. So there's two things. There's two things. Lack of generosity is the experience of not giving, and then stealing is actually of taking. Both of those will bring their own results, So if you can never get a job, or people don't pay their debts, think about it. Look at the experience, the kind of karma called experience, similar to the cause. This is what I'm trying to say about prison, about someone lying to you. It's very specific. If someone doesn't believe your words, immediately it tells you, this is a fruit of my past lying. Not lying now is the point. It's from past, So you can't get a job. It could be one of the reasons. I mean, some people can get a job falling off a log. Some people just blink and they get a job, Or even some people, it just occurs to them. Like some people, like just right now, heard about people, who lose their jobs during COVID-19, and thousands, if not millions of people, certainly in America, are being thrown out of their homes. I mean, the nightmare is so terrible. But, many people keep landing on their feet. They lose their jobs. One woman lost all her job and said, I can start my own business. So, I mean, even the thought that arises in her mind to think I'll start my own business, that's not, it doesn't occur to everybody. So the fact that it occurred to her mind, she was able to get money again. It's just even the way your mind works. So not getting a job or being stolen from or not getting credit in the bank or, all these things. So then, okay, what do we learn from this in our daily life then? It's from past karma. So the learning from it is, I must pay my credit card bills. I must every day be sincere in my credit card bills. One of the commonest problems in our world, we think, oh, these banks, they're so evil, they're so rich, they don't care. And they don't care. They've budgeted in billions of losses, but that's not the issue, because whatever I do will sow the seeds from my experiences, So we have to have incredible integrity. So the thing is, this life, let's say you can't get a job, your bills don't get paid. Some people don't pay their debts to you. You don't get credit. All this is due to your past stealing and or lack of generosity. So, how to fix that? One, you have incredible integrity with your money now. That's now, but that'll help nourish the correct karmic seeds, and it might open the door to getting a job. So you can't not connect. Oh, well, it doesn't matter if I don't pay my credit card. That's a different issue. It's not a different issue. Everything you do impacts upon whatever happens to you. So that means have extra care when it comes to your debts. Treat every cent with respect. Our trouble is sometimes we can be very generous and give away our money, think we're so generous, but we don't bother paying our student debt. Well, no, you're blocking yourself. It's kind of insane. Okay, debt is terrible. Student debt in this country is unbelievable. It's totally suffocating. So but to take responsibility for it. So you got to go to the credit card companies, you do a deal. Have integrity is so important. It's unbelievably important, you know. That'll affect everything that happens to you as well. It can help nourish your non-stealing karma, and one day you might get a job. So you've got to look at your whole life, learn from it, you know, learn from it, but also keep the vow of never stealing. That means don't just press that one button and download a free movie. It's not your movie. It was given to you by somebody else who's stolen it. It's so easy to steal now, you know. You've got to have such integrity, have such good ethics. Why? Because you do not want suffering. It's not whether you'll be caught or not, which is one of the biggest reasons we do or don't do things. We're caught up in where we're believing I'll get caught or I won't caught. And if I don't get caught, I got away with it. That's absurdity. You can't get away with anything because everything you do impacts upon your mind. So it's like having proper learning from all this, you know. Now, if the karma to be not get a job is so strong, even if you're perfect now, that's because the karma is so strong. So you have to try and have the attitude, well, this is I'm purifying my karma, not creating more negative karma, because life is pretty intense. Suffering is really powerful. We can see sometimes you can't change it immediately. They're the type of things I want to say. I hope that's helpful. What else, Dawn?
Great. Margaret said she would like to ask a question. Would you like to unmute, Margaret?
Yes, Margaret.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, Venerable. I really want to thank you for this teaching today. You're amazing. You are giving a 4 o'clock teaching to my Buddhist center. I don't know how you do it. So
I'm my own secretary and I'm so silly and I like organizing things, but then I forget I've got to do it. It was the same when I was flying around the world. It would give me enormous pleasure to fit in all these airplanes and I have a 1 hour there. I can do this one. I'm efficient and I'm a good organizer, but then I forget I have to do it. I'm not complaining, but sometimes it's just bad scheduling.
well,
No, it's true.
If you need an assistant, I'll come to Santa Fe.
Okay, good, Margaret.
Okay, I just wanted clarification on something. With none killing or none harm, okay, let's say, you know, you have a mouse in your house and you realize, well, I need him to go, but I don't want to kill him. So you call an exterminator service who does that for you. Is there a difference?
That's even 1,000 times heavier than killing it yourself, because you make someone else create negative karma on your behalf.
Okay, so this is the real issue for me. Okay, in Buddhism, from what I've learned, one of the what would you call it? Things that you want to do as an employee would be being a butcher. However, throughout the world, mostly, there are factory farms, there are people that do that deed for us. And I've just become so aware of not only the killing, but the suffering that goes along with all of that.
Exactly. So the question is, what's the crunch? Come to the crunch. What's the question, Margaret?
Okay. The question is, using the analogy of the mouse, wouldn't that be the same?
Which, give the example of the mouse one. What's the scenario?
Okay, that you don't want to kill the mouse, but you bring an exterminator in to do it.
Also, then you're suggesting that you eating a sausage is a lot worse than you killing a pig yourself. That's what you're suggesting.
Yes.
Is that what you're asking?
That's what I'm asking.
Okay, good. Let's look at it. Let's analyze it. Okay. No, it's an excellent question. We have to look at these things very precisely. What we have to first understand about karma, And this is why it's so intricate and second by second, it's very precise, it's very technical, it's very kind of technological, not a general, broad stroke, emotional, religious thing. It's very technical. So what karma means, the first step in the creation of any action is the thought, the intention, I will. Okay, so there's a million different scenarios you can get. So let's say you eat vegetables because you have compassion and you do not want to be involved in the harm on sentient beings in the meat industry. And that's the major reason people are vegetarian, which is amazing. It's so compassionate, you know. So there you've intended, I will not be involved in the harming of sentient beings. You're not saying I will not kill, because you weren't killing even when the people did do it. The butcher did do it for you, you know. So, but there's no intention. So the intention is I will not eat meat, and the motivation is compassion. That's a really good action to do because the motivation is compassion. Now, on the other hand, just for another second, let's say you intend not to eat meat because you decided you'll be healthier by eating vegetables. That's not a virtuous action. You happen by accident not to be involved in the harming, and there's some benefit there, but your motivation is purely self-centeredness. That's not a very virtuous action at all. So we've got to look at the motivation every time and the action itself. Now, let's say you never eat meat, but you go to your grandma and she doesn't know you're vegetarian. And she spent her hard-earned pension buying you some lamb chops. And she offers you these lamb chops. Now, I would suggest that it would be rude and arrogant of a person, and I'm not trying to be personal here, if you say, oh, Granny, I don't eat meat. I would say, shut your mouth and eat that lamb chop. How in a million years, this is one scenario, Margaret, there's about 1,000. That's one example, and because everything's so nuanced, it's not absolute. In that case, I would suggest that if I were to do that, that would be such a compassionate action for your grandma. And how could you possibly imagine that you create any negative karma by eating a dead piece of flesh? You know someone killed it. You didn't ask them. You didn't buy into it. You have no intention to harm. You have such compassion. But here, also compassion for your grandma. So that's one example of how when you eat meat, it cannot possibly be negative. So there's 1,000 scenarios. And let's say when you eat your lamb chop and you're a meat eater and you love your meat, and every time you think about it, you think of all those butchers and all those slaughterers, and you think, I'm so happy they did it for me. I'm so glad I didn't have to do it and all get messy and dirty with blood. You would say that's 1 billion times heavier than killing. Now, you've got another person who might eat meat and never think for a second it was a sentient being. There's no intention to harm. There's no thought to harm. I'm just giving you 3 scenarios. So it's way more subtle than, oh, someone did it for me. We've got to look at each event, each time, what's in our mind, and then be as careful as we can. There's 1 million scenarios. Again, remember, you know, even if we don't slaughter other animals when our veggies are cooked, when our veggies are grown, but insects die, billions of insects. You cannot avoid insects dying when you grow the best organic greens, the best organic carrots. And you understand there's billions of insects that died. We didn't even think of the insects, but they're living sentient beings. So in a sense, because like I said yesterday, the world is pervaded by this suffering, we've got to learn to be so conscious, so aware, and as much as we can have the purest motivation. I don't want to harm any beings, but knowing that even just by living, by breathing. So every scenario is different for different people at different times. Let's say you've got strong, heavy karma from past killing. It's best for you with absolute certainty to have as little to do with killing as possible. You could argue someone else has got no karma for killing. They could happily eat a chop every day and the karma wouldn't be that heavy. So it's 1 million examples. It's nuanced. It's way more nuanced. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at here, Margaret? So each of us has to look in our own scenario and do the very best we can not to harm sentient beings, and then have compassion for those who have been harmed, whether we like it or not, you know. And I'm not saying eat meat or not eat meat. I'm not even discussing that point. I'm just looking at the way to think about actions in the day. What do you think, Margaret?
Well, I understand. I really, you know, I get what you're saying. But on some of it, like with the example of the grandma, you don't want to hurt her feelings and you're going to show compassion. However, it's not being very compassionate to the lamb.
But let's analyze. Let's analyze really carefully, Margaret. This is not to think, oh, it's good to eat meat. This is not to think, oh, I shouldn't eat meat or should. I'm analyzing every action we do, Margaret, every second of the day. the things involved in the action you do are what determine the karmic seed you plant in your mind. Are we hearing me first? Are you hearing me first?
Yes.
It's not a political issue. It's just a literal psychological issue. Now, let me ask you a question. Let's just say you're a vegetarian. Let's say you're even a vegan, right?
Yeah.
Now, you're with your grandma.
Okay.
And you know it was the rib of a nice lamb one in the past. You know that, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, so what's this action is called eating? Do you agree this action is called eating?
Yes.
What you're about to do is eat a lamb chop. Do you agree the action is called eating? So
Yes.
let's look at the 4 things in place when you do the action of eating. First, there has to be an object, and the object is a lamb chop. Second, there has to be the intention. I will eat the lamb chop. Third, the motivation is compassion for your grandmother and gratitude for her generosity. Fourth, you eat it and that's the action. So the action you just did, the karma you created at that moment, is the action of eating based on compassion. You created virtuous karma. You did not intend, I will kill this lamb. You did not even think, I am glad someone killed this lamb. You, in fact, had compassion as you ate this lamb. You had compassion for the lamb who did exist 6 weeks, 2 years ago. So that is not qualified as an action of killing, precisely at that moment, based upon the things in your mind and those particular conditions. That's one tiny example. So it's much more specific than you're saying. And it's not to get away with something. Everybody hears this as, oh, you mean as long as I got a good motivation. It's like there's a laziness we use when we look at these things. This is a really precise analysis. Every action we do has to be precisely analyzed. Because 1 second, and another scenario, you will not touch that lamb chop because it's a different reason, a different time. So in general, to live your life with no thought to kill, therefore not to eat meat, how could you ever criticize that? Not possible. But at the same time, those billions of insects who died for your veggies, how come you don't care about that? Do you think of compassion with those insects? I don't think so, Margaret. Nobody does. Because we think, oh, I'm not eating meat, I'm a good person. We're too naive, we're too gross, we're too sort of like broad stroke. Billions of insects were slaughtered for that bowl of vegan rice. Can you hear that or not, Margaret? Can you hear that?
Yeah,
And do you accept that? That's
I understand.
No, I need you to answer my question, Precious. I'm trying to be logical each step. Do you accept that it's true that insects died when they harvested and growed that rice? Do you accept that's true?
Yes.
Okay, so then what would you do with that? At the moment, while you're eating that rice, what would be the best thoughts and best motivation to have, Margaret? To make that eating of rice a virtuous action, what would you do? Because each thing you do every millisecond is an action. It's not just a broad stroke political issue, it's an action. And each drops a seed into your mind. So how would you think to make that action of eating a bowl of nice vegan rice, how would you think to make it a virtuous action for you, Margaret? What would you think?
It's a very good question.
Thank you, darling. That's exactly what I need you to do, is think about it. That's my whole point. But we don't. We feel holy if we don't eat the meat, and we don't care that those millions of insects. I remember one time on Facebook, and I had a picture of me in Liverpool buying some kick-ass cheddar. So this fundamentalist vegan, and I say fundamentalist, I mean, there are fundamentalists everybody, but people who are a bit fanatic and who dump their views on you. That's what I mean by fundamentalist,
Yes.
He was shocked that I dared to eat cheese. So I didn't want to be political. So I remember I put in a story. I'd done some research about beings who die, insects who die, even when you drive the car. And even I remember in this particular wheat field in Australia, there was a mice plague, these cute little field mice. He had photos of them, this fellow, and they all had to get slaughtered. I mean, they weren't slaughtered kindly, Margaret, before you could grow the wheat again. But he just said, oh, you can't help that. That's often a view, and that is grotesque. That is grossly grotesque and ignorant and absurd. Because the Buddha's view is every milli action we do and is going to harm sentient beings in one way or another. So the understanding and the awareness we need is much more subtle, much more humble. And yes, don't support the outrageous meat industry. Yes, it's destroying the planet. How can we ever argue? But growing veggies, driving cars, walking, talking, we slaughter. So we have to have that level of awareness and be so conscious and have such compassion. And therefore, within this nightmare, do whatever we can to do the least harm possible. I would suggest that's the broader approach. What do you think, Margaret? Are we communicating?
It definitely is a broader approach. I guess I'm just struck with something Dr. Nick said.
Yes, what did
recently.
you say?
He said, you wouldn't want to be an animal for 10 minutes.
That's right, exactly. That's why you don't want to harm sentient beings, including the insects, Margaret, including the creatures who got slaughtered for that wheat. You don't want to be born like that. Of course you do not. That's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. That is my point too, Margaret. But, you know, I'm factoring in the field mice who got slaughtered for the wheat, and I'm factoring in the insects who got slaughtered for the rice. I'm just adding that to your little menu. Okay, Margaret, to add that to your thinking. It's the same basis, exactly what Dr. Nick said. I totally agree. That's exactly the point.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about.
Good, Margaret. I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy, darling. Because that's the point. I'm not going to make a simple, don't do this and do that. I would never do that. We have to use our common sense and think through this issue. Do you understand, darling?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Such a good
Thank
comment.
you.
Thank you so much, darling. What else, people?
Hi, yes, Venerable. There's a few other questions. One is, what are the other steps in purification after regret?
The first step is regret. That's you look at the things you think of the things you've done in this life. So like I talked yesterday, I think about my abortion, for example. It's always a good example I use because it's killing a human being. It's the first time I did it and the last time I did it. I don't remember killing a human being in this life. I killed a few ants, I suppose. Didn't ever go fishing. So I think of the actions I've done, you think of the actions you've done, and you regret that you did them out of your foolishness. You didn't know I was doing any harm. You know, you don't, so regret isn't, oh, I shouldn't have done it. That's anger. Regret isn't, oh, I'm a bad person. That's anger. They're useless. It's recognizing that out of my ignorance, out of my foolishness in the past, I did actions to harm sentient beings that will bring harm to me. That's regret. And it's kindness to yourself. And then you can think of the things in this life. Then you think of all the things you don't remember. Because just because you don't remember smoking a cigarette at 7 minutes past 2 on January the 7th, 1997, doesn't mean it didn't leave impacts in your lungs. So you think of all the things you've done that have harmed others, that have dropped seeds in your mind that you do not want to ripen as suffering. And then even if you have the view of reincarnation, you think, in any action I've ever done since the beginning of this time with my body, I regret. That's the first one. And you've got to add the words, because I don't want suffering. You've got to realize in this process, regret is compassion for yourself. It's not a generalized regret. It's much more specific. So then you think all the actions of your speech, especially we clever humans, you know, bad mouthing, gossiping, harming others with our speech. You regret any of the actions, like today, you bad mouth your boyfriend, you remember certain actions. And then you think, whatever I've done with my speech, this life and beginningless lifetimes, especially as humans, I regret because I do not want the suffering results from these seeds I have planted on my mind. All these seeds are in my mind, waiting to ripen. I do not want them to ripen. That's regret. Compassion for yourself. Then the next step logically is, well, whom can I turn to give me the medicine that I can take to purify this, for goodness sake? That's reliance. And you know, the practice you do, we visualize all the lamas and all the Tibetan traditions. You visualize above your head, Bodhisattva, particular Buddha, you know, and you delight that you found a doctor. Or you say a little refuge prayer. The second part of the second step, reliance, is 2A, 2B, is now you have compassion for others, those you have harmed. I then have compassion for the creatures I've harmed. I have compassion for the baby I aborted. I have compassion for the sentient beings I've lied to, stolen from, harmed, since beginningless time. This is where compassion now comes in. As much as you can conjure. I must purify now for their sake. And if you're brave enough, you have compassion for those who've harmed you. Why? Because they will suffer unbearably in the future. Understanding karma is the basis of compassion, first for yourself, but then you realize everybody's in the same boat. So how can I not have compassion for everybody? We're all driven by our own ignorance. We're all not realizing that we are experiencing the fruits of our own past actions. This is the hugest reason the Bodhisattvas have such compassion for us. Then the third step is the remedy. So in this context, the particular meditation one does, you visualize different things, you imagine nectar coming, you say the mantra of Bodhisattva, you imagine purifying. This is very powerful. Your mind is what purifies you, your thoughts. The remedy, and then the resolve. The fourth one is the determination to change. So if you've taken vows, you reiterate those vows. I will never kill. I will never lie. I will never steal. You don't lie to yourself. So you've got a really bad habit. You might say, I won't badmouth my boyfriend for 24 hours, and you'll mean it sincerely. So you're imprinting in your mind, you're digging grooves in your mind of your new habits. There's no karma that can't be purified. So the second one, as I said, no, I told you the four. First, regret purifies the experiences similar to the cause, because is what happens to you and the hands of others, roughly speaking. 2, reliance, including refuge and compassion, purifies environmental karma, the way the physical world impacts upon you. 3, so for example, 3, the main practice, the remedy, purifies the lower realm suffering. And 4, the resolve to not do it again, purifies the habit to do it again. And that's the difference between the little boy who went fishing and who fell in love with fishing and continued to fish, because he hadn't purified the habit to kill by vowing not to kill. And he hadn't purified the habit. That's the tragedy. And so that's the difference between, and that's why I just, as I said, they're the 4. So any more questions on those, I'm happy to answer on that process. I think it's in your course notes this week. I'm sure it's in all in your course notes. Yes, Teresa.
Yeah, I have a question about the resolve part. So oftentimes when I do this practice, I regret having a certain, it's in the mind, like having certain thoughts, like spontaneous thoughts of thinking bad about this person or judging this person, or like a mind thing. And then when it gets to resolve, it's hard, because they say don't lie to the merit field. So it's hard to say, I definitely won't have these thoughts again, because they come spontaneously. So then I change the languaging a little bit and I say, I will do my best to not,
but good point. But what's better is you give yourself a timeline. Because do my best is a bit weak, but you say, okay, even Lama Zopa says, even you say, okay, with thoughts, first of all, Teresa, thoughts are much more subtle. And this is, I think, is an interesting point here. Because thoughts are so spontaneous, because they're programmed in our mind, we don't intentionally have them, we know that. But when you start to practice, honey, you start to get some awareness of all these thoughts popping up. Now, actually, there's nothing to regret. If there's 2 things. One, if you notice the thoughts coming, if you notice the thoughts coming, but you don't buy into them, then you have nothing to purify. You didn't create any negative karma. But if you have the thought and then you start continuing the conversation and buying into it, that's then different. Because you can't stop the thoughts. You can't possibly stop the thoughts, and you cannot possibly resolve to stop them until you've got shamatha. Truly, sweetheart, because it's just the nature of mind that it just raves on 1,000 thoughts a second. So that's where the first step in this awareness that we have to cultivate is you're stepping out of your head and you start to even notice these crazy thoughts. And that's why I use the analogy of noticing all your crazy roommates. You don't buy, the first step is don't buy into their stories, Teresa. Then you laugh at them. You're not creating negative karma. It's just coming old junk from the past. So to start saying you regret those and make a decision, you can't. Of course you do. You'll say, I will do my best to watch my mind. But the only way to control your mind is have shamatha. And most of us won't get that in this life unless we give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll and go to the mountains for several years. So then as you keep progressing, the awareness gets clearer. You're able to identify that's an angry thought, that's a jealous thought, that's a resentful thought, and you analyze it. And as soon as you start to do that, there's not only not negative karma, it's virtuous karma, because you're using it to understand yourself. It's brilliant. So and this is the biggest problem for us. We are terrified of our thoughts. You're not saying that to me, but we can't, because we feel we can't handle them. We feel we can't control them. So we have a terror that I'm being so bad. No. The dirt is coming out, Teresa. In fact, it's a sign of success that you are seeing all the crazy thoughts, this kind of these reverberations from past negativity. But when you don't buy into them, you cannot say there is any negativity. In fact, it becomes a source for you to create virtue, because you do the analysis and you understand it and you unpack it and you analyze it. That's virtue.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Good job.
Yeah.
It's important to see. Again, it's always the details, much more clear in details.
Mm-hmm.
Understand? What else, people? Any questions in the chat, darling?
Yes, from Kenny. I feel the idea of perfection is far from freedom. Is there happiness in just being? Is perfection the goal of Buddhist psychology?
There's quite a few thoughts packed in there. Say them again. Say the first part.
I feel the idea of perfection is far from freedom.
Okay, stop for a second. That's a full stop after that, right? I feel that the ideal of perfection is far from freedom. Is that what he says, or she? Well, at first I don't quite understand it, but let me try and analyze that. Yes, to answer your last question, perfection literally is the goal, and that's what Buddhahood is. Not even nirvana. And this is the Buddha's point. And this is because it's insane. This person is insane because we can't posit this in our culture. There's no view equivalent to this in modern psychology. It sounds like mental illness to think that. So we've got to first see what Buddha's saying. So by the word Buddha, like I said, the etymology, Buddha implies the utter eradication from your mind of all the delusions. And that's what liberation is. That's what nirvana is, basically. You've cut the root of delusions. You see reality as it is. You have no anger, no attachment, no ego grasping, no jealousy, no depression. You have bucket loads of love and kindness. You're amazing. That's nirvana. That's not yet perfection. Still, it's pretty good. But then you add the compassion wing to the mix, and that implies you have perfected. You've enhanced, by the addition of bodhicitta, you've enhanced and perfected those virtues that are already in your mind when even you have achieved the first Buddha, the first one, liberation. So perfection is liberation. So the second sentence he said?
Is there happiness in just being?
Okay, let's analyze that. Just being. Okay. The only person who can just be is a person who's a Buddha, for a start. It's not a possibility. That's an insane idea to think an ordinary person whose mind is driven by delusions and fears and dramas and worry, even at the subtlest level, which we can't even see at the grossest level, not even a possibility, then it's impossible to just be. The only person who can do that actually is a Buddha who's got rid of all delusions. But we can practice doing that. That doesn't mean achieving it. We all know that. You can practice playing a backhand, or you can be like Federer. There's a big difference, but you've got to start somewhere. So to try to just be is a good way of putting attempt to accept whatever's in front of you. That means give up the attachment that's always hungrily wanting more and is dissatisfied with what you get, and try to be content with that cake that's given to you when you get it, and think, this is a wonderful, delicious cake. Thank you for the kind person giving me cake. It's not the cake I really wanted, but I'm happy with the cake. That's just being, and that means not being attached. And then it means not being angry. How dare this person bring this cake? I want that cake. No, this cake is good enough. That's practicing not being attached, and that's practicing not being angry. I prefer to say that as a definition of just being. But to just be, when you're you're on the road driving and you're trying to just be, well, I'm sorry, if a car's coming at you the wrong direction, you better start using your analytical brilliance and start making some damn decisions to get the hell out of the way. You've got to have a super conceptual mind and a super sharp mind to decide to go here, go there, put your foot on the brake, go this way, go that way. That's not just being, that's being super intellectual. We need that sometimes. So it depends on the scenario. It's much more nuanced. And the third point was? The third sentence?
Yeah. Is perfection the goal of Buddhist psychology?
I answered that point. So I hope that's a bit of analysis that might be helpful to you. Thank you. Next question.
Great. The next question, is it possible to say mantras for vegan food in the same way one can for meat? Or is it to add the bodhicitta motivation to the action instead?
Okay. This brings us to the different levels of practice, okay? So the very first level of practice, junior school and high school, entry level, junior school and high school, control your body, control your speech, and control your mind. The main emphasis in this entire level of practice, which is the wisdom wing, is to be having this awareness to control your body and stop doing negative actions. Why? Because I don't want future suffering. So the main reason you won't eat meat, the main reason you won't try and kill that insect, the main reason you will not try to harm sentient beings is because you don't want future suffering. We can't stand this in the West. We think, oh, that's selfish. No, it's not. It's intelligence. You're applying the Four Noble Truths, and you've got to have this incredible compassion for yourself. That should be the driver at the first level. You've got to have this incredible awareness of your own actions and the consequences of their actions to you. You've got to have compassion for yourself. That's what the Four Pronoun Powers are all about, the very first one. That's what the whole practice of abiding by the laws of karma is all about, and watching your body, speech, and mind, because you do not want future suffering. So from that level of practice, there's no wriggle room. You live in the lay vows, you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't lie, you don't badmouth, etc. And why? Because you don't want future suffering. So that doesn't mean you don't have compassion, but that's the beginning of the compassion wing. First, it's got to be to see the suffering that it's caused for you. That's what Buddhist teachings are about. There's no wriggle room at that level. You just play safe. You eat as little as possible. You be aware that, you try not to eat any. Of course, you wouldn't eat. You wouldn't do any. You would not try not to be involved in any actions that have harmed sentient beings. So now, to answer your question, the next level of practice is now we start to think of sentient beings. Now there's a sentient being on my plate. So if I'm going to eat that meat, there's one, you can mitigate it. I'm not telling you should or shouldn't eat meat. I'm not being political. I'm not being fundamentalist. I'm not telling you to do anything or not do anything. You're the boss of your life. I'm just giving you information. So if there is a lamb chop on your plate, you'd say mantra and you'd blow on that lamb chop. At least you mitigate what you're doing. If there's rice on that plate and sentient beings died for it, there's no benefit in blowing on the rice. But you can have compassion. Of course you can. For the beings who got slaughtered to grow that rice. You must have that. It's naive and bizarre to think you're a holy person because you eat rice, but you're a wicked person if you eat the lamb chop, like we said before to Barbara, or to Margaret. So yes, as much as you can, that's the compassion wing. You then think of how can I help others? Because you're being conscious of your own actions, this causes you to realize everybody's in the same boat. So you start to begin to develop compassion. You begin to develop the wish to not just for your own sake, but for others' sake as well. This gradually comes in. You grow step by baby step. For example, driving car. If you're really being strict at the first level, and you don't want to do actions that harm sentient beings because you don't want future suffering, you basically wouldn't drive a car. You'd be like not Mormon, those people who never drive cars and they have different reason, but you'd be like a Jain. You'd put a thing over your face because you don't want to breathe in beings. You wouldn't touch any meat. You wouldn't drive a car. You'd be cautious when you walk. You'd be so cautious. Abiding by the laws of karma would bring that view of incredible caution. But then you go to the compassion wing and you realize in this nightmarish world, you can't win. Even if you stop eating, even if you're a breatharian, you're breathing in beings. The nature of the universe is every tiny piece of the four elements is a conducive environment for the existence of sentient beings. You can't avoid it. So you do your best. You try to have compassion every second. That's why the main reason to stop eating meat isn't for your health. It's for compassion. But you're the beneficiary. You are the beneficiary. The lamb is still dead. Just because you weren't part of it doesn't mean it didn't get killed. This is something else interesting to think about as well. No, I won't go into that, don't worry. So you got the compassion one, you do your best now to try and, for others' sake, not just for your own sake. So you be compassionate. His Holiness said, it was so interesting. His Holiness said one time, if you want to help others, practice compassion. If you want to help yourself, practice compassion. So the first part of practice is for your benefit. The second part of practice compassion wing is for the benefit of others. You've got to start with yourself first. We miss this completely in the West. We think we feel guilty. It's like ridiculous. You've got to have compassion for yourself. That's what they mean by renunciation. That's what they mean by renunciation. You are revolted at the thought of more suffering. And that's compassion for yourself. Then compassion for others is stupendous. It's got to be built on something strong. Compassion is not enough. You've got to do the wisdom wing first, His Holiness says. So I hope that helps. What else?
Yes, there's another question from Kenny. The Dalai Lama said he didn't understand the self-hate in the West when he first came here. What do you think the root of self-hate is in the West?
It's dissatisfaction. It's the result of attachment. So let's analyze attachment again so we'll understand why dissatisfaction is the fruit of attachment. My mother would say, and we know it's true like we analyzed yesterday, the more you get, actually, it causes you the more you want. So we know this is exactly Buddha's point, and we understand it's profound. So what we think is getting cake will bring satisfaction, but getting cake will temporarily bring pleasure. But because of attachment in the mind, we're not satisfied with that moment of pleasure. So we need another cake and then another cake, and then we have to stop because we'll vomit. So what will be the result of that is still attachment, but even more dissatisfaction. So the more you get, the more you want. So we are born in this culture, and Lama Zopa says it's the main suffering in the West, because of incredible attachment from the past and being born in an amazing world that's the product of attachment. We are deeply, profoundly dissatisfied, and not just with what we get, but with myself. That's self-hate. It's the fruit of attachment. Dissatisfaction. In fact, we're not happy with what I get. We're not happy with my body. We're not happy with what the boyfriend does. We're not happy with the food. It's always dissatisfied. But when it comes to dissatisfaction with me, that's what self-hate is. Analyze it. It's pretty logical. As the result of attachment, masses and masses from past life, programmed from past life. We get born with this dissatisfaction. Our mother and father didn't teach us to hate ourselves. It's there. It depends. I mean, they can also hate themselves. Everybody does. No one's ever satisfied with their mind. We're never satisfied with our achievements. We're never satisfied with the body. What's default assumption? It's not enough. It's not good enough. It's not big enough. It's not thin enough. It's not this enough. That's dissatisfaction. It can be for food and things, and maybe another person might be quite content with themselves. But when it's also, I'm not happy with me, that's dissatisfaction about me. That's the deepest one, and that's self-hate. It's the fruit of attachment. I'm not enough, not good enough, not beautiful enough, not nice enough, not intelligent enough. And this is a tragedy. We believe that thought. That's the tragedy. We believe it. We believe it. 27 people can tell you how good you are, how kind you are. We're hungry to hear it. We do not believe one tiny syllable of it. We believe our own story. This is the tragedy. What do you think, Kenny?
Challenging.
What, darling? What?
Challenging.
Yeah, it's true. I know.
But I guess the healing is in just being okay with what we are.
Let me actually put it this way. It sounds so cute and simple. He said, you've got to learn to be content now. That Kenny, this second, is who he is, and it's the best he is, and you're content with it. And then this is the point. I mean, a simple analogy for me is this: you start to play piano and you pass grade 1. You've achieved something, right? But we immediately go, oh, it's only grade 1. Then you get to grade 974. Oh, it's only grade 974. So literally whatever we do, we always hungrily think there should be more. If we think we should be better, we have to change that script in our head, Kenny. That's what part of the purifying will help it. It'll remove the junk from underneath, but that's the day-to-day practice. Change the concepts, rewrite the script. It sounds corny to us to sit there and think I'm good enough, because we don't believe it. But we've got to start somewhere, Kenny, and we program our mind with these new positive thoughts.
Okay, but it's sometimes I think also it's an excuse not to go forward.
That's right. It's laziness. It's true. Of course it is. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's common in the West. It's
yeah, Lama Zopa says the main suffering in the West, the worst torture, this self-loathing, this dissatisfaction.
I mean, the psychiatrists make gazillion dollars off it.
I know, exactly.
Take it easy.
Thanks, Kenny. Thank you so much. What else, people? 20 to the hour. What do we want to? So now I think, let me think. Okay, so we've talked about karma, we've talked about vows, we've talked about how you purify karma. And all these are the techniques to help boost the wish not to harm and the wish to develop our qualities. All this is junior school. This is junior school. I'm not even going to high school yet. That's junior school. If you had this already, you're going to be purifying the causes of the first kind of suffering, the suffering of suffering. The consequences of this level of practice will be you die a happy death, you get a good, decent human rebirth, you have no intentions to harm, you have experiences where people won't harm you, you'll be fat and healthy, and you'll have intentions and wishes to practice a spiritual path. How fortunate. That's amazing. That's the result of just practicing junior school. But we can go further, like we started yesterday. We can go to high school, the middle scope, and we can get to the root of the causes of suffering. There are two causes of suffering: karma, we've dealt with that in junior school. Now we get to the main cause, which is the delusions in the mind, and these two subsume to the delusions. The delusions are the main cause. Now, having subdued our body and speech by, refraining from harming in the framework of vows and by purifying, we now can get to the root of it and become our own therapist, as Amiyashi puts us. This gets us to the next stage of practice, where we're now going to start to try to purify the causes of the suffering of change by purifying attachment and all the other delusions that come as a result. So Buddha talks about, when you study the mind in depth, Buddha talks about 84,000 neurotic states of mind. And then the 84,000 antidotes, the virtues. But it was funny, every time I asked the Geshis, which texts will you find this map of the mind? And they say, well, you can't. So God knows where the text went way back when Buddha first started. I don't know. But anyway, the point is Ling Rinpoche recently, I've heard this only recently from young Ling Rinpoche. I hadn't heard it before. He said 21,000 of those delusions are rooted. Okay, sorry, before that, all these 84,000 subsume to the three poisons, the three root delusions, the three toxic emotions, which sounds so cute to us in modern psychology. The root, and there's a hierarchical relationship between these three, the root delusion, such that when that is uprooted, we've completely cut all the suffering, including the suffering, the all-pervasive suffering. And that gives rise to attachment. Now, this root one is known literally as ignorance, We'll go into it in a second. That and its function, broadly speaking, is a deeply instinctive, primordial, deeply instinctive, beyond articulate, deeply instinctive, grasping, fear-based at me and everything else having an intrinsic, independent, concrete, solid, inherent character. It's primordially deep. The assumption here is the assumption of reality in our culture, of a real, solid, concrete self. Our starting point for psychology is that, to get a good, strong, healthy self, which is actually this view. There is a concrete, definite self in there. Buddha argues with that, and it's a very nuanced argument, and we'll go into it. This is the root of all problems, all realms, all universes, all suffering since beginningless time, Buddha says. So on the basis of that, which is underneath everything, underpinning everything, that is its immediate voice is what's called attachment. And this is the main cause of suffering in this planet, in this world that we occupy. Effectively, attachment is the main cause of suffering every millisecond. So what it is again, it's multifaceted in its function. And again, it's a deep assumption in the bones of our being, but it's multifaceted. So like I just said before to Kenny's question, we come into this life with the deepest energy of it from past attachment, which is this primordial belief that I'm not enough and everything else is not enough. That's dissatisfaction. It sounds such a simple word. Primordial deep belief in the truth of that. That's the energy of attachment. So naturally, because you feel you're not enough, you hanker after something to fill up the gaping hole, don't you? And that's what the five senses are all about, to find an object out there such that when you make contact with it, it triggers pleasure and fills up the gaping hole and brings satisfaction. So that's what attachment believes. So we hanker, and then we search and manipulate and control to get that cake, that person, that event, that job, that sound, that smell, whatever it might be. All of this is utterly unarticulated. It's utterly instinctive from lifetimes of practicing it. And there's an utter belief that I am empty and that will fill up the hole. That drives us to get the cake, the boy, the whatever it is. This is the grossest level of attachment. Then that attachment, then the next level of it is dissatisfaction, hunger, emotional hunger, manipulating, hankering, then manipulating and controlling to get. And then when you get to possess, especially with people, this is now mine. It's like an extension of you. The attachment is so powerful, you know. So all of this is like on this tightrope. It's so terrifying to try and get all this, because Buddha says it's all a lie. It's all underpinned by a total lie, because it's not what we think. Then when we do get, and we do have, and we try to possess, it goes like air between our fingers, and we lose it second by second, and day by day, and month by month, and year by year. So then what that gives rise to, the millisecond attachment is thwarted, millisecond by millisecond, is aversion. And that's multifaceted too. This ego grasping is the colloquial term for this ignorance when it clings to the me. There's attachment to get what that fantasy me wants. And then there's the aversion. The millisecond attachment is thwarted, and that's 1,000 times a day. 1,000 times a day, attachment at ever so subtle levels and at gross levels won't get what it wants. So that arises, that second, this third state of mind, which is aversion, and it too is multifaceted. The obvious level of aversion is volatile anger. Then there's a milder levels of aversion that we never pay attention to. Irritation, annoyed, upset, frustrated. They are mild levels of anger. Anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So then even the subtle levels of aversion, as you keep not getting what you want, it builds up, builds up, builds up, and you're not paying attention to it. It's just at a level of a feeling. And then one day you're inert in bed and can't move because you're overwhelmed by depression. That's the internalized buildup of thwarted attachment, which ripens as aversion. But it's much subtler and harder to see because we don't think of it like this. It's just a mild, subtler level of anger. These are the three poisons. And then, as Ling Rinpoche said, 21,000 of those 84,000 are rooted in ignorance. 21,000 are rooted in attachment. 21,000 are rooted in anger. And the other 21,000 are rooted in all three. It's a really clear, coherent map of the mind. And we're not discussing generalized mental diseases like OCD or ADHD or bipolar or schizophrenia or this or that, or the other thousands of psychiatric diseases in the textbooks. We're discussing very specific, precise moments of thought. That's how you look into Buddha's view of the mind, you know. We have to unpack and unravel those thoughts. So they're divided into three categories: the neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, ego-grasping-based nonsense, the virtuous, positive, optimistic, valid, reasonable, clear, wise, useful states of mind. The first lot are completely opposite to reality because they're rooted in ego grasping and they're rooted in no sense of dependent arising. The next lot, relatively speaking, are rooted in dependent arising. When you have the virtuous states of mind, we can see it. There's a sense of connectedness with others. That's dependent arising. They're not finally in reality until you realize emptiness, but they're better than nothing. And the third lot are, like I call them, mechanics that enable us to function: concentration, good memory, recognition, blah, 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 many of these that make us do what we do, whether it's negative or positive. You know, snipers and meditators need mindfulness. You know, pedophiles and tennis players need the mental factor called discrimination. The pedophile has to point out the little girl, not the little rat. That's discrimination that helps them understand the difference. So the job here in this second part of practice, to be our own therapist, Lama says, it demands we study this model. How can you know what anger is if you don't have Buddha's definition of it? You can have Jung's, you can have yours, I don't mind. But if you want to study Buddha, you've got to have his view, and it's quite different. It's radically different, surprisingly different, until we study it. And when we study it, we'll see that. But often when we do study, we get all clever and study low-rig and quote all the things. And I mean, even just Buddhist epistemology is so complicated, so fantastically interesting. But we sort of think, oh, that's Buddhism over there, but here's real psychology over here, and I have a personality disorder, and I'll talk about it. Because we still can't connect as Buddhists that this is what Buddha's talking about is our own psychology. You know, it's very interesting. So we need to understand attachment. Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about it for a whole year. We never begin to unpack and unravel it and to understand it until we go work deep inside. You know, the theories, we start with the theory, but you've got to do the work inside, internally, catching it every millisecond. And this is immensely sophisticated. This is when most of us, until we have shamatha, like I was saying to Teresa, we won't have this level of clarity, but we can get it. It's possible. It's all there. The tools are there, you know. So we start where we are. And the same kind of discussion I was having with Margaret about the precision and clarity of moment by moment of each action. What is in your mind at that moment if you eat that lamb chop? What's in your mind at that moment if you eat the rice? What's in your mind at that moment? What is the name of the karma you create? Every millisecond, we create a particular karma. And what determines the seed that it pops in the mind is the motivation and the intention. And that can be different every single time. In the same 6 scenarios, 6 different people, 6 different karmas. It's very precise. The precision and analysis and clarity and depth of analysis we know we need for, like, neuroscience, even making a cake, is exactly what Buddha demands we use to understand karma and our mind. Yeah. So the essence of this, the essence of the first level of practice is you stopping the suffering of suffering. Here, this one, you're now stopping the suffering of change because you're giving up attachment. And the next level of practice, we do the Bodhisattva path, we skip over that, we get to the 6 perfections, and we go to the end, and now we've got to have single-pointed concentration, this laser-like focus that goes to a subtle level of your mind, the microscope of your mind, so that you can now do the actual work of ridding ourselves of the all-pervasive suffering, quitting suffering and its causes all together by realizing emptiness. So I think we'll leave that to the next session. All right, people. Any
Wonderful.
questions?
Thank you, Robina. There were a couple of small
You're welcome.
questions, or a couple of questions in the chat.
Please ask them, yes.
Okay. Sheila asks, so having compassion for yourself first is like the instruction in case something goes wrong on an airplane.
Start again, please. I didn't quite hear all the words. Start again, darling. I didn't hear all the words.
So having compassion for yourself first is like the instruction in case something goes wrong in an airplane and we're told to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first.
Good analogy. That's right. A good analogy. Very good analogy. It's a very good one. Exactly. You can't help the person next to you until you can breathe yourself. And that's, this is my point. In the West, we really don't get this level of practice. We think it sounds selfish to think of compassion for yourself. We think it's selfish not to kill because you don't want to have future suffering. We think it's selfish. We really haven't heard properly what Buddha means. Because if you don't get that level of compassion for yourself, if you don't get that level of renunciation, if you don't get to the level of being disgusted by delusions and the results, you can't possibly get such compassion for others. And maybe this afternoon, as well as speaking about emptiness, we'll talk about bodhicitta and how for proper compassion, you first have to have renunciation. And that's simply compassion for yourself. We will see that, the logic of that, and we will not skip over it. But it's a good analogy, exactly. Go on, Samantha.
And just one other one from Pat. What is the pure purpose of the brain?
The way I'd put it, without insulting neuroscientists, is that it's the physical indicator of what's going on in the grosser level of mind. That's the perfect way to put it for me. So it's not insulting it. And that's the point that slowly people in the materialist scientific world are starting to come to, like that doctor who works in the business of organs. He said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that much. So that's powerful. And there's more and more awareness of that coming, I would say, or maybe a little bit. But yeah, the brain, of course, we have a physical body. We have a physical body, but it's conjoined with our consciousness. So the consciousness is where things happen, but they trigger the physical responses. That's the way to put it. So that it's perfect to look at the brain. But the point is, though, for the Buddhist view, that can only tell you what's going on at the gross level of consciousness. Because when you've got samadhi, when you've got shamatha, when you've got single point of concentration, your brain has closed down. That's why the woman who was technically dead on the operating table, being kept breathing and toasty and warm with all the machines, and they get the circular saw to cut her open, and she is having because her subtle mind is still there. That's the Buddha's view. And like people who are on the operating table when they're in anesthesia, or people in their dreams, because that's subtle consciousness, can be aware of what's going on. I've had the same experience myself. That's subtle consciousness. And people, and that woman on the operating table, dead as far as the West is concerned, but her subtle mind is still there. That's why she can still breathe with the machines. That's why she's toasty and warm. That's why her heart can beat. So her subtle consciousness is aware, and then her heart goes from 100 to 200 beats a minute, the nurse monitoring the machine said, when they got the circular saw to cut her open. Now, that does not fit with the materialist model, but that's her mind. But that won't be indicated by the brain because the brain is dead. No, would have there, because the brain was kept alive artificially. and it would have registered, but her senses would have ceased by then. They didn't have to give her anesthetic. She was dead for them. Their senses had ceased. So the subtle consciousness, and indeed very subtle consciousness, subtle levels, these are what these ingenious Indians have discovered and the great tantric yogis have discovered. This is not yet discovered in modern psychology, but the people are working with the Dalai Lama trying to do this, which is marvelous. They're at least open to the possibility now. So the brain is the physical indicator of the grosser level of consciousness, thoughts and feelings and emotions and sensory. But there's subtle level of mind that's not factored in there. Teresa, you've disappeared. That's the answer to that question for that person. Okay. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I accidentally turned my camera off.
Oh yeah. So that was the answer. So I hope that's enough. And let's look, it's 2 minutes to go. So why don't we have a break, an hour's break, and have relax and look at the sky or whatever you want to do. I'll see you all in an hour.
Thank you so much, Venerable.
May bodhicitta grow and grow and grow in the hearts of all. This aspiration to be of benefit to others. Thank you, sweethearts. See you soon.
Thank you.